This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Adrian Bordy, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show. Hi, I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories, and welcome to episode 572 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show we'll be discussing Season 1 of the animated series Scavengers Reign, about a group of survivors stranded on an alien planet. And this will include spoilers for everything in Season 1, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up we've got Andrea Kail, making her 38th appearance on the show. She's a graduate of the Odyssey Writers Workshop, and her short fiction appears in the Writers of the Future anthology, Fantasy Magazine, and Lightspeed. She's been a television writer, producer, and script supervisor for shows such as Late Night with Conan O'Brien, The Chew, and WWE's Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown, and she's currently a writer for Pixelberry Studios. So, Andrea, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dave. Good to be back.
Then next up, we've got Zach Chapman, making his 17th appearance on the show. His short fiction appears in Nature, Tales to Terrify, and Writers of the Future, and he's also the creator of the comic book series House of Blood and The Spellslinger, and co-creator of the comic book series A Haunting on Mars. His latest comic book series, Kaiju Blues, is currently in pre-launch on Kickstarter. So Zach, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
And also joining us today is Mercurio D. Rivera, making his 4th appearance on the show. He's the author of the short story collection Across the Event Horizon from Newcon Press, and his story Beyond the Tattered Veil of Stars recently appeared as a podcast from Dust Studios, featuring the voices of Jillian Jacobs from Community and Justin Kirk from Weeds. His first novel, Worgen, The Alien Love War, which was nominated for the Arthur C. Clarke Award, is out now. So David, welcome to the show.
Hi, David. Happy to be here.
Okay, and so Zach was the one who recommended that we all watch this show. So Zach, tell us about how you first heard about Scavengers Reign.
This was a Twitter thing. I follow a ton of European artists, a lot of comic book artists and just visual artists, and they were raving about this maybe a year ago, I want to say, and I was like, oh, that looks cool, but I had canceled my Max subscription, so it kind of just was not. It was on my radar in that people whose voices I respect were saying very good things, and then I watched like half a trailer, and I was like, I'm good. Like, I don't want to watch the rest of this and have something spoiled because this looks cool to me, and then I'll just watch it at some point. And then it just completely fell off my radar. And then maybe a couple weeks ago, there was an announcement that it was getting a Netflix release, which is funny because I don't even have Netflix, but that put it back on my radar. And I was like, hey, now that I have Max again, I should check it out. And then I was like, well, the last show that I made Dave watch was not as probably science fiction-y as he wanted. And I was like, this thing is probably extremely science fiction-y just based off of the trailer. So, I mean, that's...
Well, let's just explain for people who missed that episode. So it was Invincible, which is more of a superhero show, was the last one.
But it's going to get into space opera stuff, I promise. But anyways, so that was kind of where I was like, I hadn't seen it, and I had wanted to watch it. So I just sent the trailer to you, and I was like, hey, check it out. And it's rated really high it's critically rated very high. So I figured it was worth watching, and that's where I'll leave it. I hadn't watched it until I, recommended it.
Yeah. And so did you know anything about the people who created it or how it came about?
Nothing.
Or anything like that?
Just watch the trailer.
Yeah. Well, so I'll explain. So the show was created by Joe Bennett and Charles Hutner. And so they have been doing like little animation things for like Cartoon Network and stuff, I think, for a couple of years. And so one of these little animation things they did was this thing called Scavengers, which was on Adult Swim. And I don't know, I sent the link to everybody. Did everyone get a chance to watch that?
Yeah.
Yep.
I just watched it like 5 minutes before we hopped on.
All right, cool. So Andrea, why don't you tell us about Scavengers?
The short animation.
Yeah, as opposed to Scavengers Reign, which is the show.
Well, I mean, it's a very well put together short film. The animation is less sophisticated, or some of it. The human faces are less sophisticated than Scavengers Reign, but it is very much like Scavengers Reign in that it makes you work for information. It throws you into a world you don't understand what's going on. You don't understand what these people are doing. And then it explains it at the end and you're completely satisfied. And it was all done in 7 minutes, 8 minutes. So I watched it also about a half an hour ago. and it just, it was so much like, I was primed for that sort of immersion in a world from watching Scavengers Reign. So I just didn't let my impatience get the better of me. And I just let it lead me to where it wanted me to go.
Yeah. So in this short film, you have these two astronauts and they're on an alien planet and they're doing all this weird stuff. There's all these alien creatures and they're kind of like, hunting them and catching them and getting a part from one of them and giving it to another one. And it's in this huge sort of like Rube Goldberg kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And you don't know why. And then at the end, it turns out that they're doing all this stuff just so that they can get kind of a vision of life back on Earth. It's in these these city streets. I think it's Manhattan. That's kind of what it looks like. But, they just get this glimpse of life back on Earth. And then you there's the implication that they just do this over and over again, that this is kind of a loop that they're on because they're homesick. So yeah, it's a really cute, cool little short film. I don't know. So David, any other thoughts about the short film?
No, I agree. I thought it was really cool, and I thought it was interesting. They were like proto versions of Sam and Ursula from Scavengers Reign, and I like that it had a sort of a punchline at the end where you see why they're doing all this. You get an explanation for everything you've seen before, which is not really the case in Scavengers Reign with all of the Rube Goldberg stuff that's going on. It's really crazy, but I guess we'll get into that. But I really enjoyed the film. I saw it right after I finished the series. I went in and took a look at the short and thought it was great.
My concern with watching it right after having watched just season one, we just watched season one, is that maybe this is like a foreshadowing of if they do ever get more seasons, like I don't want that ending for the show. And the short, that 7-minute short, just Scavengers, it really encapsulates a lot of what's in the show. It just doesn't, it compacts it into that 7 minutes. There's narratively, it has a lot of the same beats. So I just don't want where that ends to be the ending of the show.
I agree with that.
I don't think it would be. It would be a complication, but definitely not the final resolution of a season 2 or any other season. I don't think.
Yeah,
you couldn't.
Yeah.
It's a perfect little short story as opposed to expanding it into a novel.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that won't be the end of season 2 or whatever. I'll explain. So I watched an interview with Joe Bennett, and he said that he'd been thinking about Rube Goldberg machines. And then he happened to watch this video on YouTube where I think it was in India, and it was these guys, and their job was to put boxes together, and they did it all day long, and they were so good at it that it was just sort of mesmerizing watching how fast they could put these boxes together. And he thought, there's just something satisfying about watching characters who are so adept at a particular task, and he thought it would just be fun to make a short film where you're watching people who are really, really good at something, and sort of that combined with the Rube Goldberg idea was sort of where the short came from. So he. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say that like Scavengers Reign, the short also is very sparse in dialogue. I think there's no dialogue.
There's no dialogue in the short. Yeah.
So it's very interesting how they can convey so much information with using only images. Does it very effectively.
Yeah. He actually said his original concept for the Scavengers Reign was to have no dialogue, and fortunately they didn't stick with that.
That would have been really unbearable.
but that's kind of, that was kind of the aesthetic he was going for initially. He also talked about ASMR. I don't know a lot about ASMR. It seems to, from what I gather, it's sort of like girls on YouTube whispering into the microphone in a way that's supposed to be relaxing or help you go to sleep or something like that.
Yeah. It's like mind calming stuff.
I get that for this show because, one, I mean, I watched it on a plane, but as soon as I got home, I wanted to just put it on repeat in the background, as an ASMR thing. And that goes a little bit into the music of it and the visuals, but which is an ASMR thing. It's sound and visual. And for me, it was I just want that happening. I don't have to be fully engaged with it because I already have the narrative of it. I could just have it on in the background and just enjoy it at that level. I don't know if that makes sense.
I want to follow up with the music. The last thing I think I wrote in my notes was the music is all of it's like a lullaby. It's just very, even over, the open, which is the ship, blowing up and everyone ejecting. It's that soft, calming lullaby music, which is, it's sets it off. It's diametrically opposed to what's going on the screen. And I think it's just a really interesting thing to do.
Yeah, that jumped out at me too. That it's this piano, this sparse piano music, so soft. And then then we're seeing the ship explode and the pods going down to the planet.
Yeah.
So that was awesome.
Yeah, and so it's a really original show. It really does things differently than you would expect in a lot of ways, and that's one of them having, this sort of calming music and over this often grotesque body horror action kind of stuff. But actually, let me back up a little bit. So they made this short film version, and then I don't know, somebody I think at the network liked it enough to kind of greenlight a season 1 for the show. And so they made it to this 12 episodes. Each of them are 20 or 30 minutes or so. And it was on, as Zach said, it was on Max, HBO Max. And then they did not renew it. I guess during the period that this show was made, Max was axing one or two dozen animated shows.
It's really upsetting because of how good this show is. And how the leadership at Max, it's like you said, they're just haphazardly doing things. And man, this is the outcome of that. This show getting canceled.
Well, Netflix is no better, really.
Netflix, they did pick this show up, or they're sort of, now they're distributing it. And so there's at least the hope that Netflix would make a season 2 if this does, gets enough views. But let's get into that a little bit later. But so that's sort of the origin of the show. And then sort of the basic premise is that, so there's this cargo ship in space called the Demeter 227. And there's a solar flare which causes the ship to malfunction. And so the crew abandons ship and takes these escape pods down to a planet called Vesta, which is inhabited by all sorts of extremely bizarre aliens. And so David, kind of when you sort of start watching episode 1, kind of what were your initial impressions of the show?
Well, what struck me was the tone of the show. And the show really is, in my opinion, all about atmospherics. It's very meditative, because there's such sparse dialogue and there's the soft music going on in the background. We're kind of immersed in this, this vast phantasmagorical landscape along with the characters in the show. And we get to experience alongside them all of this strange and bizarre form of life that's on the planet. I was going to say flora and fauna, but it's not clear plants are actually plants or that animals are actually animals. They're such weird hybrids. So, we get to experience
it's funny because
all
usually
this.
when you say flora and fauna, you mean two different things. But in this one, maybe when you say flora and fauna, you mean
you should say maybe fauna. But it was really interesting, and like I said, meditative is the word I would use, because you're kind of trying to figure out what the characters are thinking. They want to get off the planet. By the end of the episode, they've managed to secure the landing of their spaceship, and that sets up the rest of the series as the three groups of survivors. And we should probably explain that there are three sets of survivors, and there's three storylines that are going on simultaneously. The first is with Sam and Ursula. Sam is the commander of the ship, and Ursula is a botanist. So they're one storyline as they're trying to master their environment and find their way back to the ship. And then there's
Ozzy
and Levi. Ozzy and Levi.
Oh, Levi,
Ozzy,
yes.
Yes, Ozzy is with the robot. Ozzy, who is a cargo specialist, and she's working alongside a robot. And so that's in the other group. And then the last group is Cayman, who is by himself. He's isolated, stranded in his pod, unable to get out for weeks until he's rescued by this by this native to the planet, this telepathic type of, I'd say it's like a toad panda. And that's the story launches from there. But very interesting.
Yeah. And so as you said, Sam and Ursula are very obviously sort of inspired or kind of an evolution of the characters from the short. And so they're the ones who have kind of learned how to use the planet's flora and
creatures
fauna to their advantage. So they can, there's certain creatures that they can use as kind of like a breathing apparatus, and there's some they can use as kind of like inflatable like balloons to lift them up in the air and all this kinds of stuff. So I'll say the good things about the show were immediately apparent to me. The backgrounds are unbelievably beautiful. It looks like Mobius, if people know.
I was right about to say this show is like Mobius mixed with Studio Ghibli or Hayao Miyazaki. Like that's the visual.
See, my first thought was Heavy Metal. It looked like the animation from Heavy Metal. Some of the animation, yes. Yeah.
He is the
right.
He's like the main. He did most of the Heavy Metal stuff. Yeah. Like when it was a comic or an album.
Yeah, well, it's funny because Andrea and I, for one of these panels, we watched the feature film
Heavy Metal music
cartoon called Heavy Metal, which is inspired, as Zach is saying, by it's like a graphic novel series. But
Heavy Hurlant or something like that. I forget what it's called.
Well, so it was originally a French magazine called Metal Hurlant, but then they started an American version called Heavy Metal. But so for the feature film, it's a couple different, it's like an anthology kind of thing. But one of them, I think the longest one, it's like this woman who rides, like a woman barbarian with a sword who rides around on a flying bird. And so for that one, they actually tried to get Mobius to do it, and he wasn't available or something. So they just imitated his style as shamelessly as they possibly could. But so it looks fair. This show, Scavengers Reign, it was like obviously, an homage to Mobius. Just the style is really, really unmistakable.
It has that clean line art, I think they call it, which is everything. It has simple outlines, even though it's a very, very dramatic landscape that we're exploring. It also reminded me a little bit of Miyazaki. It's like Miyazaki's like a fantasy version of this.
Yeah.
But a very interesting combination.
No brushes were used. It's like all just like a micro pen, which is a very French, like it's a very European look to it.
Mm.
Yeah, so like lots of like flat colors, but like tons of line detail is how I would describe it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the the toad panda that David mentioned. His name is Hollow in the subtitles, but he's like a Studio Ghibli, like he's like stepped straight out of a Studio Ghibli movie. So yeah, those are. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, even with the like Studio Ghibli always has a kind of villain character that has like a dark tar gunky thing in it. Not all Studio Ghibli, but almost every single Miyazaki film has some kind of dark gunk goo that is like a villain. And I mean, right in episode 1, we get that. So it's like, okay, I get your inspirations. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I guess just to explain that. So this creature, Hollow, he kind of extrudes from his mouth this levitating black globular proboscis that
is it, or is it a goo?
I was gonna say goo.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. It's hard. It's a little hard to describe.
Yeah.
Go with me here. And it sort of like forces its way down the throats of creatures and kind of possesses them, and then they do the bidding of the. They fetch food essentially for this Hollow creature.
It's very benign. When you see it doing it initially, all it's doing is it's just mesmerizing these little creatures with that black goo to fetch berries for it, and it's all it's not at all threatening until it encounters the disturbed human. That's when things change. Yeah.
So I was. Okay, go ahead.
It's all shown visually. Like we're explaining all of this, but this is like all visually explained, like and prefaced. Like you see it first happen to like those small creatures that it possesses, and so when you see it starting to do that to a human, like you don't have to figure it out through like dialogue. You know what's going to happen. So the show does a really good job of easing you into the stakes and the setting. So it's not that confusing. I mean, it can be confusing, but I think it does a good job to not be confusing, with at least with the mechanics of, because there are a lot of mechanics with how these little flora fauna things work.
Yeah, so I was saying that, so there's a lot of stuff about the show that's incredibly good, that was immediately obvious to me how incredibly good it was, including the visuals, including the music and the atmosphere and everything. But my initial impression for the first 4 episodes was that the like pacing and characters and like writing, like plot, were like fine, but not as amazing. I wasn't as impressed by them as I was with the visuals and the music and stuff. And I was finding it a little hard to stay awake during the show because it is sort of so kind of like trance-like and ASMR. Or whatever.
It is soothing, and I'll admit that I did nod off in one episode and had to go back and rewatch it. But I agree. It's sort of like, it reminded me of an indie movie in some ways. When you watch, sometimes you have long-held camera shots of a character looking off into the distance, and you're wondering what they're thinking. There's a lot of that in those first few episodes, and it's more about kind of like in classic literature, more about the journey than the destination. As they explore the landscape as they go along. And then I think the series takes a turn toward in the last third when it becomes more plot oriented and action oriented.
I felt like in the first third that I was experiencing a lot of tension because there was a lot of things that I didn't know, and I didn't know how they were having an impact on these characters. So there's a robot, Levi, that gets some gunk, some like spores or some of the fauna like in his circuits, and the planet, it seems pretty quickly like the planet is changing him. And for me, and again, that's kind of done all visually, and there's like, for me, there was like a concern of, what does this mean? And is he going to turn on Ozzy? And so I don't know. I was very much still with the plot of this during those first 3 episodes, and the pacing too, because like splitting it into 3 distinct paths, and one of those paths in the first third, that you're getting a lot of backstory with Cayman. He has a wife that, or well, actually, a partner.
Before we get into the Cayman's whole backstory, but just do you? So Zach sounds like didn't have any. You basically liked everything about the first 4 episodes.
I feel like I'm gonna be bad on this one too, because I really, man, I don't have too. There are a couple little things here and there, but I don't have a whole lot negative to say, and not even about the plot, because I do think that this was well written, and I do really like the pacing of it. I was getting a lot of, like I said, I was getting a lot of tension. I was getting a lot out of it narratively during those first 3 episodes, and or first 5 episodes. I think in the 3rd episode, there's this moment that's really similar to the Scavengers bit, where you see this this creature. I think it's Ursula finds this creature, and its sole purpose, like she witnesses it being born, and its whole purpose is to kind of be the reproductive like
facilitator.
It's like facilitator, or instance. It initiates the reproduction of almost like an entire habitat, which grows out of a husk of a dead animal. And I found she watches it, and to me it was like really profound, because it's like it does its whole reproductive thing, and then it dies, and it like buries itself, and then we move on.
Yeah,
and it was just like
I agree. That was one of my favorite scenes in the whole series.
It was like profound. I don't know. I
mean, she's clearly moved. I mean, she's seen the entire life cycle of this tiny little humanoid creature, and in just a few eye blinks for her, she sees it all. And by the way, it's all silent. Violins are playing in the background.
Yeah.
Her eyes are tearing. I thought it was deeply moving, and I love when she comes out. She can't explain what we've seen it along with her. She can't explain it. She's trying to explain it to Sam, and he's like, I don't have time for this nonsense. We need to get somewhere. But I agree. That was just a great scene. I loved it.
Yeah. Well, no, all the stuff was definitely cool. Like I'm saying, all the visual stuff. I'm just saying, I just had the sense, I could just tell that this was a show made by people who are primarily visual artists. And, and I felt like those first couple of episodes kind of felt a little bit to me like, check out this cool alien I drew. Okay, now check out this other cool alien I drew. Now check out this other cool alien I drew. And the aliens were really cool, like no question. But I started to have the apprehension that there wouldn't be any more to this show than kind of this parade of cool alien designs.
Yeah.
So Andrea, you agree with that?
I agree with that. I had just started watching it. I had seen something again on Twitter about it, and somebody was saying, you have to watch this so that it doesn't get canceled. We need more great shows like this. And I'm like, all right, it's science fiction. I'll watch it. And I watched the first 3 episodes, and I was nodding off, and I probably wouldn't have continued watching it, except the next day you emailed me and you're like, hey, are you watching this? Do you want to talk about it? And I'm like, all right, sure, I'll go back. And I'm so glad I did, because like you said, the first 3, for me, it was the first 3 episodes were just like, you're saying there's no tension. There was no narrative tension. There was tension between the characters. You see tension between Sam and Ursula, between Levi and Ozzy. Cayman's nothing but tension. But it starts to pick up, for me, it started to pick up in 4, and then I was mesmerized. And because that's where the plot finally picks up, and you see people changing, and you see character progression. And I mean, I'm so glad you asked me to do this, because I probably would not have gone on with it after episode 3. And that's probably my only real criticism of it, is that it could have used an edit here and there.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is how I imagine it. This is pure speculation, but it sort of seemed to me that the first couple episodes were kind of like the creator's vision based on adapting their short. Yeah. And then they brought in a team of writers to help them get another, get 12 episodes out of it.
Yeah.
And so once they brought in, more experienced writers and, narrative kind of artists, then that's when, to me, the show takes a big jump in quality because, there is some as Andrea is saying, not just, physical danger to the characters, but you're wondering what's going to happen next in the story. That was my experience anyway.
Yeah.
My wife.
Let's get David back in here. David, how do you feel about what I was just saying there?
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think that I do think that it's a question of, as Andrea said, a narrative thrust versus other strengths that the show has. Those first few episodes, when we are experiencing, along with the characters, this different alien landscape. And there's also, there's certain themes that are introduced in those first episodes that play across the entire series, including just the idea of, man's place in nature and interaction with nature. And that, those themes are introduced, and the characters have different approaches to how they interact with nature. And that plays very much into the plot developments as they go along. For example, Ursula is a botanist. So she's able to she's curious. She wants to learn about the local life forms and to use them and to interact with them. Sam can't be bothered. He just wants to move along and is not really that interested, except he just wants to get off the planet as quickly as possible. And Kamen, corrupts the natural life forms with his feelings of guilt and
rage, really
raged himself and rage at the world over everything that's happened. So I think that those themes were introduced throughout the show in a very effective way. Because
I'm primarily interested in story, but I could see someone who's primarily interested in visuals thinking, the first couple episodes were the ones I really liked the best. They were, more different, and then it just kind of turned into a normal TV show after, like a more conventional TV show after that. I could see someone having that outlook. So I think it just kind of depends on your taste, but that was how I felt about it. But Zach, you were going to say something. You tried to say my wife felt
I was like, I got home and I was like, this show is so cool. You have to watch it. We started watching it, and she just like looks at me and she's like, is this a show that like people just watch when they get really high? I was like, okay, like, but it's good. So yeah, I totally understand that criticism. I think that, like, this is that show. At least the first 4 episodes. Yeah, if you are really into weeds or shrooms or whatever, this is that visual feast of like, oh, you're gonna be like, oh, what the fuck. But also, it, to me, it was still very enjoyable being a completely sober person. So
all right, well, so let's get now into the Kamen thing. So Andrea, tell us about Kamen. What's his deal?
He is a narcissist who blames everybody else for his problems. That's basically what he is.
So how about just in story, what happens to him?
Oh, sorry.
Story?
Okay.
What is his backstory?
Sorry. I was relating him to every man in my life. Sorry. So we first see him. He is trapped in his capsule. He's locked in there. He can't get out, and he's going crazy. And then he sees this little creature outside the window who lets him out, and then, it ejects its goo
Proboscis.
into his mouth. Yes. Whatever the black goo globule thing is. Anyway. And then we start seeing his back story, which is his relationship with his wife, basically manipulating her into doing what he wants, just putting himself first in front of her, and how he got her to go on this mission she didn't want to do this, and he got her to do it. And he misses her, but we also see how he mistreated her. And so he gets out of there and he starts, he's mesmerized and he starts bringing food to the little creature, Hollow. And then he kills an animal and he brings it to him. And that's when it all starts really going bad, because the little creature eats flesh and starts to grow and turn into a monster. And also I think there's the implication that the creature is absorbing his rage as well.
Mm-hmm. And, that's right. And also Kamen is the one responsible for the ship, for the ship experiencing the disaster because he was looking for a shortcut to maximize profits. So he exposes the ship to the dangerous solar flares, and that's what leads to the whole disaster in the show. Mm-hmm. So he's got, he feels guilt over what he's done, and that's the tool that's used by Hollow to manipulate him.
Yeah, so he's kind of seeing, I don't know if we said explicitly, but he's sort of seeing visions, and so he sort of imagines that his wife, Fiona, who he left behind on the ship and is presumed dead, he sort of sees Hollow as her, and she's kind of talking to him. So it's this kind of very sort of dreamlike sort of thing.
Hallucination, I would say.
Yeah. But so for me, the show really started to pick up steam for me. So we're introduced, he ends up being a minor character, but there's this character, Charlie. He's kind of this blonde guy who wakes up in one of the cryopods, so it turns out they're able to get the ship to land. After several weeks, Sam and Ursula are able to get the ship to land, but it lands far away from all of the survivors. So they're all kind of have to make their way to the landing site. And so in the meantime, some of the creatures get into the ship. And so this guy, Charlie, he wakes up and the ship is infested with creatures, and he kind of runs out and, runs out into the jungle and is trying to survive. And he sort of grabbed me because the characters we've been introduced to so far seem to me in those early episodes kind of weirdly blasé about their situation. They're like something's trying to kill them every 15 minutes, but they don't seem to be that concerned about it weirdly. And so
that's my biggest I agree. That's probably my biggest complaint about the show.
Yeah. But so he was the first person who sort of felt more like a normal person, like who's like reacting with an appropriate emotional register to this situation.
But I think that he was, like he had said, I think he said something like, I've been running around for a week.
Did he say that? Oh.
It
at
was
least a couple of days, he says. Yeah,
something like that. Yeah, it was confusing because he doesn't get a whole lot of screen time. Visually, it's like he was out and then he gets killed by Hollow. But as opposed to the other characters that are three parties that have been, I think, stranded for at least months. Months, but even that is just not enough for me to buy into their like Rube Goldberg-esque understanding of the world. Like they do wildly crazy things within the first episodes and actually throughout the whole series, but it's like their understanding of the world is like a world lived in, and as it goes into kind of the second and third act, like there's even more of that's even more irritating, but then it's explained by some of the, I guess, creatures getting into people and manipulating their thoughts or the things that they do. But yeah, I just don't, it was just a little too unbelievable. Like the amount of extremely intricate actions that they were taking in this very foreign, fantastical land that they'd be able to figure out how these creatures interact with each other such that they're able to perform all these crazy acts. Like that was a little too much for me. But
I had that same reaction. I was like, wait a second, how do they know that if they plant this seed, this flower will come up and emit this gas that will, it goes on and on and on. I'm like, you would require to study this for centuries to
That's it. I was like, this is like this would only work out if they were like descendants of the crash.
Yes. And I was wondering, I was thinking, well, could it be that they've already explored this planet and they already have some understanding going into it? But I don't think that it's consistent.
Rationalization in my mind was that they had, previous knowledge of what the creatures were and how to use them. But that was the only thing that explained it in any way to me, because I agree. It was just like, how the hell do you know you cut yourself into this creature and then pull a couple of organs and I like it zero sense.
And you get a light bulb out of it.
Yeah, you get a light bulb. Or you put a fish on your hand and it blows up and you fly. It was like, what?
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, so I think like, you can sort of see the evolution of this show kind of becoming what it was meant to be. And so you start off with the short and then, but it's because in the short, the characters have by implication been probably years on this alien planet. And so to kind of transplant those two characters and make them now recent, people who've just crash landed on the planet doesn't totally make sense. I mean, there's a lot of things, honestly, that don't totally make sense. But again, this is more a visual artist show than a, storytelling logic show.
Question that kept popping up for me was, why do they have no weapons?
Yeah.
That makes a couple of knives and that's it. Like, it didn't make any sense to me that they wouldn't have something to protect themselves. If you're, a colonizer, don't you usually bring weapons when you're going to some place where you don't know what the dangers are?
Yeah. I mean, I assume those were on the main ship maybe, and they just, because they all had to leave in a hurry. I don't know.
Wouldn't that be something you put in the pod? I don't know.
You'd think, right?
Yeah. I really like that as a bold choice though, because it's like, I mean, I can see dudes shooting at aliens and alien life forms like kind of anywhere. Like, so to me that was appealing. I mean, we do get one in the first episode. The robot, shoots him with a flare. That's cool. But
you would think that also they'd fashion some weapons, some pokey things of some sort.
Well, no, they do have pokey things.
They're not walking
Ursula
around with
doesn't.
them. Yeah, she never has a weapon really. Sam has a knife on his belt, and that's it.
And Ozzy has a spear, and you
she
actually
made it.
see
She's the only one who made a weapon. That's it.
Yeah,
and we do see that the couple that's shown in flashback, the earlier couple that crash landed on the planet. That they one of them uses a shotgun to kill a creature. But yeah, you're right. The main characters, it's interesting they don't have weapons.
So I agree. I kind of like with Zach, I kind of like the aesthetic of them not having weapons, but it makes absolutely no sense. Like that you would have a survival pod that has a robot and a motorcycle in it and no guns. I mean, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
I mean, that could have. I really wish they had just put in a bunch of like empty used guns, because it does make sense if you're there for like months and months. You probably would have ran, and you might just have immediately run out of whatever ammunitions because you were trigger happy and this is a very, very strange world. So, I mean, they could have maybe just put that in there. I mean, I guess. Yeah,
or they could have just had a line about how we used up all our ammo last month or something.
Except there's no dialogue in the show. But yeah, that could be an explanation.
But it, like if Sam and Ursula were carrying spears and stuff, it would make the show different. It just would make it more logical, but less kind of artsy or something. So I guess that's a choice that you have to make as the creatives. But okay, but so this guy Charlie, he quickly meets his demise. But then we're sort of kicked into, so the show has been like sort of body horror in the first couple episodes, but then we get super body horror in kind of the middle stretch, where there's all sorts of creatures who, like clone you. Like, so there's this plant that kind of like sucks your blood and then makes a clone of you, and then the clone tries to kill you and bury you, and then it kind of like explodes and spreads spores, and there's some sort of Cthulhu-esque kind of creature that has attached tentacles to somebody. And so David, what did you think of kind of the this more sort of body horror movement to the story.
Yeah, I liked it. I thought it was, I mean, there are scenes, there's one scene where Ursula is, I don't know if you remember, they're in the underground forest and it looks like she's going to suffocate. And there are stems coming out of her veins, and then her guts kind of pour out onto the floor. And then I'm not sure if that's just a hallucination or something, but then she manages to escape. But the show is just.
That's actually in the first episode.
Yeah,
that happens.
Was that the first episode?
Yeah, that's when they go to get the battery from the.
Right. But I do think that it is filled with body horror, and I thought it was gruesome, grotesque, and it was nice to put that alongside the beauty of here's these beautiful plants and here's this beautiful landscape and here's here are these reeds that sway in the wind and make music, and then the next second they shoot off these venomous projectiles. I like that. I like it's a counterpoint to the beauty of the show to have this grotesque body horror.
Yeah. Well, since you brought up that thing, let me just mention. So there's a fan theory that in that first episode that Ursula dies and is replaced by a copy.
I immediately I was like, oh, that's what happened. Like that was like the very first thing I thought, and then I was like, oh, I guess not. Like 2 episodes in, I was like, okay, I guess not. Maybe not.
I expected some reveal, and it never happened.
So basically, let me just explain. So what happens is that you're in this cavern with all these corpses with sort of mushroomy things growing out of them, and she accidentally bumps one of them and ingests or inhales this, spores or something, and she sees this like growth sort of approach her, sort of forming itself into her face and sort of speaking in her voice. And then she dies. And then she kind of wakes up moments later, totally fine, and escapes from the cavern. So it's a pretty straightforward inference that she actually did die and has been replaced by a copy. But then it never gets mentioned again in the entire season. And it would be pretty weird, I think, at this point, given everything we've seen, for that to come back.
Yeah.
It would be pretty offensive because that's basically what this show does. Like, that happens with other characters pretty much. I mean, the show is all about like the characters changing the environment and the environment having its effects and changing the characters. I mean, we haven't really got into Levi's story, but he's basically has.
Well, let's just stick with Ursula for a second.
Yeah.
So does everyone agree that it seems like they were maybe toying with that idea, but decided not to go in that direction? But you can still kind of see the.
Yeah, I mean, now that you mention it, it didn't. I was wondering, what happened there? 1 second she's dying, the next she's floating up using that balloon. That does make sense. But I think that story is kind of used later on with Sam when he's cloned.
Yeah,
and he's almost replaced. So I think maybe they decided to go in a different direction.
But it's weird though.
Unless it's like off. The conceit of the show is just like there are no more humans left, and it's just all of the characters are replaced by the planet itself.
Yeah, I mean that could be. I mean that's sort of because this reminds. I don't know if people have read The Fifth Head of Cerberus by Gene Wolfe, but this was really reminding me of that. There's actually a bunch of, I was going to mention, because this sort of fits into the whole subgenre of humans coming to an alien planet, which is dangerous and having to figure out the ecology, the local ecology in order to survive. So my list here is Tunnel in the Sky by Robert Heinlein, The Mote in God's Eye and The Legacy of Heorot by Niven and Pornell, and Hyperion by Dan Simmons were some of the first
I would say Roadside Picnic too, and Annihilation, like Jeff Vandermeer. Like,
huge Jeff Vandermeer vibes in the show for sure.
Yeah, I did see an interview with the creators where they said they had plotted their show before Annihilation was published, so they wanted to make clear they were not copying off of that.
Well, I mean, Roadside Picnic was before Annihilation, and it's like exact same plot.
Yeah, that happens. That happens. There's a series written by Harry Harrison back in the 80s called It started with West of Eden. It's about sentient dinosaurs. And it reminded me of that series because the sentient dinosaurs their technology is all bio life forms. So the boats are like squid carcasses and guns are reptiles that eject projectiles. And so I had strong vibes from that as well. And Ridley Scott's Alien, the body horror of that.
Yeah.
Actually, my pitch for, or my log line for this in the first 4 episodes is I was going to say this is like Alien if it was made by NPR.
That's pretty good. Mine is David Attenborough meets David Cronenberg.
But yeah, so there's all sorts of awesome. Does anyone want to say anything about the body horror stuff before? Because the next thing I'm going to get to is the scavenger characters who lands on the planet. But before we get to that, is there anyone want to mention stuff that happens before that?
Sam gets kind of I'm not sure if when this happens, but Sam gets kind of impregnated with a seed of a creature that manipulates its host into creating probably like a nest for its and spreading its seed and reproducing elsewhere. And it's like inside of his body, and it kind of gives him like superhuman abilities for an episode or two, but it like causes him to bleed out of his chest. It causes him to throw up seeds and then to have like impulses to like put those seeds inside of other people, which I think is great. And it's like really, there's a lot of tension there, and it's really nerve-wracking. And he like pulls open his chest sometimes, and you get like a little peek of like what's in between his ribs, and you're just like, what's going on inside of his body? And that is really, really good body horror.
Yeah, that was really gruesome. And I liked when Ursula had that growth on her back, and it was all over her body. It was this disgusting fungal thing. And then she lays in the pool, and these fish eat it off of her.
Ozzy. Yeah.
Ozzy. You're right, Ozzy.
And what's really funny, I wanted to make this joke to my wife, who's very pregnant right now and just keeps buying baskets and putting them in cupboards and like starts like these new projects to like reorganize things. And there's like a whole episode where Sam is doing that. And I thought it was like the funniest thing, because he's like impregnated with this thing, and it's causing him to like build like mud, like little caves, find like a really good spot for this like host creature to like reproduce in. So yeah, I love that. It's gross. And it's also like, it's like sad because you're like, are we going to lose this character? Like, I love Sam. So
yeah, well, let me say, because I, like as I said, I was kind of lukewarm on the characters to start with. I thought they were just a little bit bland, a little bit kind of off. But I really came to like them all as the season goes on, and by the time the Sam has all the energy to do all this stuff, I really loved the characters by that point.
Yeah.
So that was.
And when you lose them, or some of them, it hurts. Like when Levi was destroyed, I was.
Me too.
I was affected.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, and Levi is a really good like real boy story, like a robot to human, or I just feel like the way this show did it, and it didn't over explain it. Mm-hmm. It's a trope that you've seen like a million times, like the robot that kind of becomes sentient, like a cold like robot that's not like an AI robot that becomes that has like actual living parts, and basically that gunk inside of him in a body horror way, but more, in a benign. For a robot, he becomes like a sentient being, and then he gets completely murdered by Hollow, which is sad.
Yeah. That's what I like about the way they set up a lot of the stories is they just throw you into the middle of what this person is doing, this strange behavior of Levi or anything. And then the beginning of each show, like the cold open of each show, shows you like a flashback to what happened. So it's like it explains it afterwards, and I kind of like that. because it sets up the question in your mind, and then it finally answers it, and you're like, thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
With Levi, for me, like the part of the first half of him is like, is he going to be evil? Like, because we've seen what this planet is doing to other people, and it makes them do like, just want to reproduce or whatever and kill things. And so I'm thinking like, is Levi going to turn on Ozzy? And then when it grows into it just takes a different route. I really like that. And then he gets obliterated.
See, I liked Ozzy. I mean, I liked Levi from the beginning, and I was mad at Ozzy because she was so mean to him. I was really annoyed. Stop kicking him.
I love how the character Levi evolves. At the beginning, she's like, "Can I take a look inside you?" And he says, "Sure." And by the end, he's like, "Yeah, I do mind actually. I mind if you take a look inside me." So I love that. And even when he comes back, when he's resurrected by the planet, somehow glues him back together and recreates him. I was worried that he might be changed and be oblivious to Ozzy and to the others. And I'm glad that they did not go that route, that he kept his humanity, so to speak.
Well, they like set it up to where maybe he won't, because he's a little bit indifferent to Ursula, who is hurt, or right. I forget who it was. Yeah, and so you think, he's completely lost his humanity.
Yes.
And then there's that twist, and you're like, go save her. So.
Yes, I agree with that. That was
okay. Well, let's back up a little bit, because before that happened. So, and this is where the story really kicked into high gear for me, is that you have these 3 scavenger characters who come to the planet because they want to raid the cargo from the Demeter. And so this is Chris, Barry, and Terrence. And I really found them really interesting characters, particularly Chris. I thought was the character that interested me the most in the show. I don't know if everyone. So Andrea, do you agree with me on that? Did you like them or not?
Yeah, no, I think it was great. It was it throws a different wrench into the whole thing, to the whole story.
So tell us about Chris. What is
Chris
she
is
like?
the leader of the group. She is cold-hearted, out for herself, clearly hardened by the experiences of her life, which we don't know, but clearly they were not good, and all she cares about is her own survival, and tries to force her outlook on the other 2 members of her crew, Terrence and Barry, who's a teenager. And she is cruel to Barry, just, doesn't want to allow him to be a kid and wants him to be an adult. And it's heartbreaking watching that.
Yeah. And like all good villains, she's completely self-justified in everything she does. She's ruthless, she's self-centered, but in her mind, she's doing a great deed. She's bringing back all of these great goods for her colony. When she does terrible things, she knocks unconscious Ozzy, leaves her to die, all tied up. She says, "Well, I didn't kill you, right?" And and when Barry, the teenager, wants to stay behind and save the cryogenically stored humans, she says, "You're so selfish. Why are you so selfish?"
Yeah.
So I loved the way she thinks, that like any good villain, she's in her own mind, she's a hero.
Yeah, she's almost like a cross between like a cult leader and a corporate motivational speaker, because she's like, constantly saying like, "Oh, you'll be an asset," which was just very sort of corporate.
And stay focused was the other one.
And it's manipulative too. She's very manipulative.
And she's so full of herself. Like she's been on this planet for like a day, and she's lost literally like a third of her crew by getting killed. She's lost her ship. Like she's completely incompetent as a leader. She just is. And she just keeps telling Ozzy, like, like she tries to position all these conversations like she's the leader and like she knows what's going on. And I think she's just really well written in those situations. The way she talks to Ozzy, who's by the way, been on this planet for months and months and months and knows much more about everything and how to survive here than Chris does. And Chris just kind of like keeps trying to put her in her place or like subtly imply that who's really in charge and what's going to happen when they get to the ship. Yeah, that was cool. And I love how Ozzy notices this happening and does some subtle things to try to turn her crew against her, and even sabotages while they're there's a scene where they're moving across the river on wet rocks, and Ozzy's using this like life form on the planet to help the other members of the crew, but then barely puts any on Chris's shoes in hopes that she's going to fall. And then there's a confrontation there where she's like, I mean, it really comes to a head where it's like, what are we going to do when we get to the ship? Are we going to save the people? You got to have my back here. And when she says no, then Ozzy just flat out attacks her. And I love that for both characters. Like, you know, it makes sense. Like, I didn't think that Ozzy was like villainous for just straight up attack, like cheap shotting this wacko leader.
Yeah, the plot comes to a head. I mean, I agree with you, David, that this is where the plot takes over in the series, and things get really tense when Ozzy and Chris butt heads. You know, who's really the leader of the group? And I love that Ozzy waits until she has the upper hand, and they're traversing these slippery rocks. And then she's got the upper hand at that point. That's when she says, "Wait a second, we're not gonna just leave those people behind, right? We're gonna wake them up." And then, no, we're not. And that's when they butt heads. It's just really well done.
Yeah, and Barry was a great character, I thought too. I mean, he's clearly on the spectrum, but he's sort of good-hearted, but socially unaware, but very capable in a lot of ways. And yeah, I just thought the introduction of those characters was just, hugely beneficial for the show.
Yeah, I didn't realize he was on the spectrum until I read it afterwards in some reviews. I just thought he was just a confused teenager. But in looking back on it, yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the way it read to me.
My best friend growing up had an older brother that was on the spectrum and that had a recorder and would walk around and record people like all the time. And I was like, oh, that's that.
Yeah. But so one thing that seems to not make any sense to me at all. So maybe, I don't know, you guys can tell me what you think. But so when the ship experience, so I mean, there's a couple ways in which this show doesn't really work as science fiction. Like, the world building is not very well thought out from a science fictional perspective, I would say. And part of it is so they're taking this cargo ship from point A to point B, and somehow along the way they end up orbiting this totally random planet that just happens to have a breathable atmosphere, and they just happen to have a solar flare at that exact moment. Seems really sort of weird to me. And so then they abandon the ship, leaving behind dozens of people in suspended animation. I don't understand why why the critical crew don't stay on the ship and try to land the ship and save all the people in suspended animation. Like, why does every single person who's awake abandon ship, leaving all these people in suspended animation? That seemed to make no sense at all to me.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I understood it was the plan was to get to their destination, and then Kamen says, "No, we're going to take a shortcut." And Sam says it's dangerous. You can't really go in that direction, and because of the danger of presumably these solar flares, and when they take the shortcut, it's set up so that it's not a surprise that they encounter some difficulties like this. I agree that.
But why is there no? But it's the fact that there's a planet with a breathable atmosphere just happens to be there at the point that they get hit by.
It's just I could accept that. I mean, I agree. It's a long shot, but yes, that's the premise.
It's the coincidence, which is what you're pointing out.
Yeah. The part that's like does not make any sense is why didn't they just land the ship? Like, they land the ship in the second episode. Why didn't they land the ship?
Right.
Why did they even eject?
Right. Instead of landing it remotely from the planet, why didn't they land it when they were on the ship? That's a good point.
That's what confused me.
I mean, I could buy that it seems like the ship is about to have some catastrophic failure, and it makes sense for some amount of the crew to get in the escape pod. The botanist can get in the escape pod and go, but like the captain, and like the people critical to running the ship, it seems to me should risk their lives to land the ship and not just abandon all these people to presumed death. Like that doesn't make sense to me.
Right. Yeah, I see that point. I just assumed there was an emergency, so they just kind of, everybody just kind of headed for the pods. But did Sam express some? I don't know if you remember. Did he express some guilt that he? He
does, yeah, but he should, in my opinion,
with good reason.
Well,
he's like, but he's like, I feel like I left him behind. I'm like, you know why you feel that way?
Because he did.
Well, what I want to know is how was Kamen just able to walk onto the deck and take over the comms and change the course? Like Sam had to give Ursula his card in order to access the cryo thing, in order to wake people up. She needed a card and a code. He could just walk onto the deck and sit down at the comms and change the course of the ship.
That was weird because he screams at the lackey there. I outrank Sam. I outrank you. I outrank everyone. You do what I say. So that doesn't make sense to me that he would outrank the captain or the commander of the ship. Maybe there's some weird corporate way that the hierarchy works in this world that's different from ours. I don't know, but
still, if I were that guy, you know what? Good for you. I'm going to go talk to the captain. I have no idea what his title was, but when it comes to the ship, it's the captain's helm. It's not that whatever whatever his title is.
Yeah, that jumped out at me too when he said I outrank Sam, and because I was like, that's strange.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking that he was just saying random shit because he was like nuts. Because he lets these things bottle up inside of him, and then he bursts, and that's like kind of his character. Like he gets beat up like mentally, and then he just takes it out on someone in a totally irrational way, and so.
Yeah, I mean that's actually a really good point. Yeah, that he's just saying whatever pops into his head in his anger to get what he wants, even if it makes no sense at all. Yeah, I guess that could be.
Could be.
All right, so let's talk about so all the characters kind of converge on the Demeter, including Hollow, who by this point is like gigantic and can rip apart whole spaceships with his telepathic powers and stuff like that. So how about David? What did you think about the climax of the story?
I thought it was awesome. I thought it was great to see all of these characters converge. I like the fact that Hollow encounters Chris. Chris and Barry get there first. They're starting to raid the ship. They're getting the shuttle ready to leave and to abandon all of the sleepers on the ship. And then they run into Hollow, and they have a confrontation with that creature. Hollow has already destroyed a ship earlier in the series, so you wonder what kind of damage he's going to do here. And he's about to rip Barry apart when Chris throws a bomb at him and saves him. And they scurry off, and they realize that they have to cut bait and leave the ship. And then the other characters converge there as well. You have Ursula and Ozzy have met up, so they arrive at the ship as well. They try to awaken all of the sleepers, and then Ozzy confronts Chris one last time. She chooses to go back and save the sleepers rather than to battle her, and of course Chris decides to just take the shuttle and head off with it. But before that, Barry says, no, I want to help. I want to find a way to help these people who were cryogenically frozen and save them before we head out. We owe it to them. And that's when she delivers the line, when did you become so selfish? And then as he goes away, she locks him out. She takes the shuttle and takes off, leaving them all behind. And then that leaves that leaves Ozzy to confront the Hollow. And it looks like things are looking pretty bad. He's about to finish her off. And then we have the climactic surprise scene when Levi appears, and he battles Hollow. And really, I love that confrontation, by the way. I'm not sure I understood it. I really had to think about it because it was very trippy. It was very psychedelic. And, it really made me think because we get this incredible flashback to, when we're in the point of view of Levi, the robot, who's now merged with the planet. And we see all of the weird life forms in flashback that we've been seeing throughout the series and kind of the evolution of life kind of manifested in his mind at that point. And then against Hollow, which is a corruption of the planet's nature by Cayman. And he kind of lets out this huge blast and destroys Hollow, or separates Hollow from Cayman. So I thought it was a really great climax.
Yeah. Does anyone have any I have an interpretation, but I'm just curious what other people think about that sort of flashback montage thing.
I don't. I was at the point where I'm just going with it and not overthinking it.
I'm interested in what you have to, what your interpretation is.
Well, so it seems to me, I mean, and I think this is open to interpretation, but it seems to me basically that, like we're saying, Cayman kind of infects Hollow with his own, toxic ego, kind of, and gluttony and stuff like that. And that's why Hollow grows into this oversized monster. And so he's sort of like consumed by ego and what he wants and selfishness. And this is what Fiona, Cayman's wife, says to him in these sort of dreamlike visions he has, like, you only care about yourself and stuff like that. You could never make me a priority. And so I think what's my impression of what happens in that flashback montage is that Levi, who's now connected sort of psychically to the spirit of the planet or whatever, the sort of Gaia spirit of the planet, is able to. So Hollow tries to do his black goo trick on Levi, thinking that he's going to possess Levi, basically. But what actually happens is sort of the opposite happens, that Levi possesses Hollow and is able to sort of blast him with this sort of vision of the interconnectedness of life on the planet and the whole web of life and how everything is evolved from everything else and is connected to everything else. It was kind of making me think of in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, how there's the total perspective vortex, which just makes you see how small you are in relation to the universe. And so that kind of like blasts Hollow's ego back down to size, just the being this vision of how big everything on the planet is in comparison to him, sort of blasts his ego back down to size. I
totally agree with that interpretation. I thought it's physically happening and it's also metaphorically happening. So yeah, that was totally my interpretation as well, that the kind of the web of consciousness in the planet overwhelms Hollow and saves him. By the way, I love the fact they don't kill him. He just kind of scurries off into the forest back to eat berries.
Yeah.
Leaving Cayman kind of a shell of himself.
Yeah.
So that was awesome.
Well, it's like what's good for the community versus like what's good for the individual. Kind of like an explosion of that, because Levi is like just kind of becomes this community of itself, like planting things, and I don't know, maybe that's part of it. Part of what they're trying to say here. I don't know.
Right. Because he comes back to save Ozzy. So that definitely jives with that interpretation as well, that he's part of a community.
Yeah, and then so in the denouement, we kind of see, one of the things we see is Levi is kind of growing little baby versions of himself, little sort of organic versions of
baby robots, organic robots.
They're very cute.
They're probably the most Studio Ghibli thing. They remind me a lot of the spirits in the forest spirits in Princess Mononoke. they're like a similar size and they kind of have a similar shape, and they're also kind of like forest spirit things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then kind of as we're wrapping up, we see, they've woken up a bunch of the colonists from the cryo sleep, and they're, Ursula is back. She's sort of working in the garden. Things seem kind of peaceful. Cayman is helping her out. We don't see him talk. It's not clear whether he ever talks anymore. And then we see sort of this little postscript where there's the shuttle that Chris stole. And it sort of gets taken inside this giant, some sort of freighter kind of ship in space. And there are these cultists kind of, I don't know, they have masks, and they seem to be sort of wrapped up like mummies and are possibly like half plant or something like that.
They look like lepers to me.
They kind of do, yeah.
Yeah, so
kind of like the space eyes wide shut.
They're wearing Phantom of the Opera masks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sort of hooded robes and stuff like that. And so they come into Chris's shuttle, and it's all kind of overgrown with, organic material from the planet. And
I love the irony that, because here's this ruthless character, Chris, and she has this one moment of humanity where she tells Barry, he has a flower in his hand, and she says, "Oh, toss it in the ship. We'll bring it back to Terrence's family." And ironically, that one bit of humanity kind of dooms her, because the flower winds up overrunning the whole ship with goo. So I thought that was an awesome irony.
And a baby Levi.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and so she's sort of like cuddled in the corner begging for water is how we see her at the end. And I don't know, does anyone have any ideas about where they think the story is going to go from here, or what did you think of that ending to the season?
I thought it was a great cliffhanger.
Yeah, I thought it was open-ended for season 2.
Yeah, definitely.
I think everything ends pretty satisfactorily.
Yeah, it does.
And then there's that, which is like, oh, but then we have people from off planet with these like crazy mummy guys that are gonna come, and that could be conflict. There could be more conflict directly on the planet. I think that there's just a huge, now that we have like they released all of the people that were in cryo, so now there's a community too. So there's a lot of, I mean, it's basically any direction you could take new characters. I mean, we don't know. Sam is like assumed dead, but like he might have turned into part of the planet. So there's just so many, like, I don't even know what to expect.
Well, because those white flowers, they grow out of, like, anything that dies on this planet sprouts one of those white flowers. So I take that to mean that, I don't know, those white flowers are somehow, I don't know, I imagine it's something along the lines of they sort of like absorb all the memories of whatever died, and then kind of like burst into pollen and spread those memories to the rest of the planet, or something like that. Because like it does seem that the whole planet is about creating replicas of everything that lives on it. So it seems entirely plausible to me that everything on the planet is some sort of replica of some earlier, like I sort of imagine, maybe, I think I read this theory online, but this seems pretty plausible to me that like these, at some point, maybe this, or I don't know, somehow these white flowers and the kind of fungus stuff that takes over Levi sort of, copies and replicates every living creature on the planet to such a degree that everything is now a replica of a replica of a replica of, some form of life that used to exist on this planet but has now been supplanted by by these many replicas of it. Something along those lines, I think, is what's going on with those white flowers.
Okay.
I love that there's this kind of speculation. It would almost be a shame if were this show to continue that things are wrapped up in a nice bow, because I really like the idea of wondering, is Ursula, is she a replica? Like, is she just like plant parts? You know, like, I love that idea of.
Well, it'd be great if they brought that back if they do a season 2.
But I think Zach's saying that it's better. Like, it's kind of, this is the perfect amount of mystery in season 1 and in a season 2.
I'm saying that if they bring that back in season 2, it'd be interesting. If that becomes a plot point, that she discovers that she's actually a replica of her.
Right, but I think what
self.
Zach is saying is that we don't want any more, basically.
I think that those are. I think to make it a plot point would be to explain it. And I think to explain it is like removes the mystery. So it's like, have those things in the show, but remove them from the plot, remove them from the story, and add more. Like, add more shit that's confusing as fuck. Like, if you really, really think about it, like, you can totally watch the show and just don't think about it much, and there's not a lot of like things that you want to tie together. But like, the more you start unraveling, the more you come up with these theories. Like, is everything like a simulacra of like some descendant? Like, what even is it? Are they in the Matrix or whatever? Is this a big planet matrix of just organic plants? You know, I don't know.
Well, I'm not saying that they should explain it explicitly what the flowers are, you know, but I think picking up the thread of what happened to Ursula, and is she or is she not a replica? It has nothing to do with the flowers. I'm saying, I think picking up that thread would be a good idea for a complication for season 2. And I don't think that's explaining anything. I think it's just sort of fulfilling a promise you sort of kind of made when you set up.
They've set up the mystery in the first season, and they kind of
they posed the question and they haven't answered it, which fair, like, great, I love it. But if they pick it up for season 2, I'm not going to complain.
I want them to go, that was a good question. Here are 2 more questions.
Yeah, that's how it should be.
Yes.
I mean, I was just reading an article that made it sound like it's not looking good for season 2 of the show.
That's too bad.
Because at least according to this, it was saying that this hasn't cracked the top 10 of Netflix, charts. And so it seems a little doubtful that they would give a second season to a show that didn't crack the top 10.
That's
charts.
Too bad. Shoot, I watched it on HBO Max. I should have watched it on Netflix.
Same.
Just play it in the background.
Okay, I will do that.
Yeah, I don't think it's too late. I mean, if you're listening to this and you want more of this, which I would love to see what else they do, I would definitely watch it. I mean, I don't think it's hopeless at this point, but I think it's definitely looking less likely. At least that's what I gather.
Great. Well,
if it doesn't get renewed, if it doesn't get a new season, this will be like a cult classic for sure. Yeah. Especially for 100%. And it makes it totally, when you were saying like this is definitely a visual artist's like delight, it totally makes sense, because everyone that I was following on Twitter that was talking about this was like literally like European, Italian, French artists. So I was like, okay, yeah, like of course they would like this.
Then a French studio should take it on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I agree. This is, I mean, it's a work of art, like no question. Yeah. I mean, it's not just another TV show, it's not just another cartoon, I mean.
But and not just a visual work of art. I think the story is very much a work of art as well. Personally, I thought the story was lovely once it got started.
Yeah, I mean, you look at. Oh, good, David. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think that the themes are what interested me the most.
Yeah,
this whole idea of being in harmony with nature or being in conflict with nature. I really like the way they explored that. So I think it's a classic. I do think it's a classic for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at YouTube, there's like video after video where it's just like, this is the best science fiction show in years. This is a work of genius. It's a masterpiece. I mean, I had, maybe I just care, like as a science fiction fan, I care a little bit more about the science fictional world building logic than most people. So I had some pretty significant reservations about some of that stuff. But there's just no question that it's a work of art, that it has an artistic vision, and I would really love to see more stuff like this. I think it was like when it's good, it's mesmerizing, and even when it's not as good, it's still mesmerizing.
It is mesmerizing. Yeah.
So all right. So I guess was there any other big topics or anything that anyone wanted to mention before?
I'd just like to point out that the name of the ship is the Demeter, Demeter is the goddess of the harvest. And Vesta, which is the name of the planet, Vesta is the goddess of the hearth. So, I don't know, sort of very little,
very nice.
Harvest and hearth kind of undertone there.
Yeah, I like that. I'll point out that one thing that jumped out at me was this idea of leaving people behind. It's revisited over and over again. And I rewatched the opening episode, and that's the way the show leads off, with the corporation saying, you know what, the ship is lost. Oh, well, I guess we're going to leave them behind. Hope they didn't survive, because otherwise, poor them. We're just going to leave them behind. And then later on, it's revisited over and over again. Chris leaves behind Barry, and Kamen leaves behind Fiona on the ship, and he's guilt-ridden over that. And then, Ursula refuses to leave Sam behind when he gets captured by that weird bird creature. She goes to rescue him, and then finally Levi refuses to leave Ozzy behind when when he discovers that she's in danger. So that's this kind of jives with what Zach was saying earlier about the theme of community and helping each other, and that being consistent with the way the planet works. Not that it's all roses. Obviously, there's some predators and parasites, but that it all works in harmony in some way. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that theme of life and reproduction and survival, how everything is just attempting everything on the planet, characters and life forms, other life forms included, they're all just trying to survive. And some of the ways they survive is eating other characters and, reproducing in very strange ways and maybe at odds with other life forms. I think it's just a very broad look at life and what it means to survive and what it means to be in an ecosystem. And, even in those earlier episodes, like you see that without necessarily the character's commentary. You're just able to kind of step back and visually experience what all of this means, kind of. I don't know. I think it's meditative. I love that.
No, for sure. And I feel like, the themes are rich enough. We could keep this conversation going for a lot longer. I mean, we're all out of time, so I think we're going to need to limit it to some final thoughts here. But I'll just note that, like, the stuff with Kamen and Fiona, for example, I feel like we could say a lot more about that.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of really, there's a lot of depth to the show.
Absolutely.
For sure. But I think we are going to have to get into some final thoughts. So, Andrea, any other final thoughts you want to mention?
I don't. I would like people to watch it because I would love a second season. And I know the first 3 episodes are slow. But if you can just push your way through them, enjoy the art, don't worry about the story because it's coming. I think this is, one of the more beautiful, pieces of art and animation that I've seen in a long time. And, I really would like to see more from specifically the story and more from the 2 guys who created it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, David, final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it starts off meditative, atmospheric. The first few episodes, the star of the show is the planet Vesta, and every weird and and bizarre and awe-inspiring creature on the planet. Fascinating to watch. So viewers can watch and just immerse themselves in that and in the music, and you'll just get a lot out of it. But then it evolves into I shouldn't say evolve. It develops into a real good adventure story as the characters converge on the landed ship, and there's confrontation and action at the end. So I thought it was really terrific. And I just love seeing something like this, something so intelligent, imaginative, adult-oriented animated science fiction. And I wish there were more of it, and I wish there were a second season of this, because I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I guess one thing I'll note is that, this is sort of, as Andrea said, a little bit reminiscent of heavy metal. But when we say adult, this doesn't mean sex.
No.
Because in heavy metal, there's just if you go and listen to our review, there's just breasts everywhere.
Yeah.
And this is adult while being very restrained. I mean, there's one nude
one
breast.
Yeah.
But it's pretty, sexuality is not, or at least sort of
right.
That sort of sexuality.
Adult and the body horror certainly is not for kids.
Yeah.
Well, it's adult themes, sophisticated themes, as opposed to just a shoot 'em up adventure story.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but something like heavy metal is quote unquote adult, but it has a very, as we said, sort of teenage boy sort of sensibility. Yeah. But this is adult without having that sort of. It's a different kind of adult sensibility.
Yep.
But so Zach, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is a very thoughtful show. And I want to use this word. I don't use this word lightly. This is very original. It's not derived. It's not adapted from something else. And I'm a believer that if you want originality and stuff, you gotta consume it. If you want more original content and you don't want I love the adapted stuff. We talked about that. I love a good comic book show, but this is a show that was, built from the scratch up, meant to be a show. And so it is visual storytelling first and foremost. So it's just really original. So I really hope that it gets a season 2. Though I would be sad but happy with where it ends if it doesn't. And I'm going to definitely look into these two creators and watch every, or at least check out whatever else they've got going if they don't get season 2 of this. But come on, Netflix and fans of the show, please watch this, because it's very good. I think you will really enjoy it. Yeah, absolutely. If you haven't watched this show, go onto Netflix right now, watch it. I don't care if you fall asleep. Just wake yourself up, keep watching. You'll be glad you did.
Yes.
But yeah, so let's wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Andrea Kail, Zach Chapman, and Mercurio D. Rivera. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Andrea Kail, Zach Chapman, and Mercurio D. Rivera for joining us on the show. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.